You don't mind sitting with the little ones, do you? My mother said casually. I walked out of Christmas dinner. A year later, they finally saw me. I was 28 when I finally realized my family would never see me. Not really, not the actual me. Christmas dinner was supposed to be like any other family gathering. Uncomfortable but manageable. I'd become an expert at smiling through the subtle digs about my single status, my quirky career choices, and my apartment that was cozy, translation, too small for a grown woman. I'd prepared myself for all of it. What I hadn't prepared for was being asked to sit at the kids' table. Mom said it casually while arranging crystal glasses on the dining room table. The good china gleamed under the chandelier, place cards written in my sister-in-law's perfect calligraphy. None with my name. Alice, honey, you don't mind sitting with the little ones, do you? We're short on space at the adult table with Logan's new in-laws joining. My hands froze midway through arranging the silverware she'd asked me to set out. Around us, the house buzzed with activity. My brother Logan and his wife Helen were in the kitchen, laughing over wine. My other brother, David, was showing off pictures of his newborn to our aunts and uncles in the living room. You want me to sit at the kids' table? I repeated, certain I'd misheard. I'm 28. Mom didn't even look up, just adjusted a napkin with practiced precision. It's just for dinner, sweetie. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on the younger ones. The wooden chair beside me suddenly seemed essential for support. I gripped its back, my knuckles whitening. All around me was evidence of my invisibility. The family portraits where I was positioned at the edge, easy to crop out. The group conversations that flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream. The way my job as a graphic designer was a cute hobby while my brothers had real careers. I wasn't a child. I had a successful freelance business, a downtown apartment, and clients who respected my work. Yet here in this house, I was perpetually 13 years old. No. The word came out small but firm. Mom finally looked up, her expression shifting from distraction to confusion. What's that, dear? I said no. My voice grew stronger. I'm not sitting at the kids' table. Mom's laugh was dismissive, a sound I knew too well. Don't be dramatic, it's not a big deal. But it was. It was the crystallization of years of being overlooked, undervalued, and dismissed. It was the perfect symbol of how they saw me, not quite an adult, not worthy of the same respect given automatically to my siblings. At that moment, something inside me snapped, not violently but with the quiet finality of a thread pulled beyond its strength. I set down the silverware I'd been clutching. Without a word, I walked to the closet, retrieved my coat, and headed for the door. Alice, where are you going? People will be sitting down to eat in 20 minutes. I didn't answer. The crisp December air hit my face as I stepped outside, a shock that seemed to wake me from a long sleep. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice rising in confusion, then irritation. I got into my car, turned the key, and drove away from the house I'd grown up in, feeling strangely calm. My phone started buzzing within minutes. Text messages from Mom, then Dad, then my brothers, not asking if I was okay, asking when I was coming back, reminding me of my responsibilities, questioning my maturity. At a red light, I opened the family group chat and typed a message I'd been holding back for years. I won't be treated like a child anymore. When you're ready to respect me as an adult, we can talk. Until then, enjoy your dinner. The responses came quickly: shock, dismissal, accusations of being dramatic, selfish, attention-seeking. My father's stern, "We'll discuss this behavior later, young lady." My sister-in-law's, "Some people would be grateful just to have family to spend Christmas with." I turned off notifications and drove to a small cafe that was open on Christmas Day. I ordered coffee and sat by the window watching snow begin to fall in delicate swirls. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. My apartment welcomed me with blessed silence. No probing questions about my dating life, no comparisons to more successful cousins, no reminders that my biological clock was ticking. I kicked off my heels, hung up the green dress I'd carefully chosen for family approval, and changed into sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. The Christmas tree in the corner of my living room was small but perfect, decorated with ornaments I'd chosen, not the color-coordinated perfection my mother insisted upon. My phone had been silent for an hour when it lit up with a call from Mom. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "I don't know what kind of stunt you think you're pulling, but you've ruined Christmas dinner. Your aunts are asking where you are, and we had to rearrange the entire seating." No, "Are you okay?" No acknowledgement of why I might have left, just concern for appearances and inconvenience. "I'm not coming back," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Don't be ridiculous, of course you're coming back. Put on your big girl pants and get over whatever this tantrum is about." Big girl pants? The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mom, you asked me, a 28-year-old woman with my own business, to sit at the kids' table while everyone else my age got a place at the adults' table. It was a matter of space, Alice. Why are you making this into such a huge issue?" "Because it's not just about today, it's about every day. It's about how you introduce Logan and David as my sons, the engineer and the doctor, and me as my daughter, Alice. It's about how you ask about their work but never mine. It's about how you cut me off mid-sentence to answer calls from them." The silence on the other end was new. I'd never spoken to my mother this way before. I'd been the good daughter, the peacekeeper, the one who went along to get along. "Is that really how you feel?" Her voice had lost its edge, sounding smaller. "Yes, for years." Another stretch of silence. We didn't mean to make you feel that way." It wasn't an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received. "I know, but you did, and I can't pretend anymore that it doesn't hurt." After we hung up, I sat on my couch looking at the lights of my Christmas tree, feeling both hollowed out and somehow fuller than before. The following weeks were a strange new territory. My mother called daily at first, awkward conversations that skirted around the edges of deeper issues. My father sent a gruff text that was as close to an apology as he was capable of. "Never meant to make you feel less important. Proud of you too." My brother's reactions split predictably. Logan, always our parents' pride, was defensive and dismissive. David called me late one night after his baby was asleep. "I never realized," he said quietly, "but looking back I can see it. I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner." Those words were a balm I hadn't known I needed. January brought a dinner invitation from my parents. Not a family gathering, just me. I accepted with caution, preparing myself for either genuine change or disappointment. Mom opened the door when I arrived, looking somehow older than she had at Christmas. She hugged me, a real hug, not the quick, perfunctory one I was used to. "I've been doing some thinking," she said as we sat in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken words, and some remembering. She told me about her own childhood as the only daughter among 4 sons, how she'd fought for recognition, how somewhere along the way she'd internalized the idea that women needed to marry well to matter. "I think I've been harder on you because I see myself in you," she admitted. "Independent, stubborn," a small smile, "talented." It wasn't a perfect conversation. Old patterns emerged, were recognized, recalibrated, but it was a start. When dinner was served, I noticed something that made my throat tighten. My mother had set the table with my grandmother's china, the set typically reserved for the most important guests. My parents made efforts, sometimes awkward but sincere, to show interest in my work. Mom asked for my help redesigning her garden club's newsletter, a small gesture that acknowledged my professional skills. Not everything changed overnight. At a family birthday celebration in March, my aunt asked when I was going to settle down with a nice man and start a real life. Before I could respond, my mother surprised me. "Alice has a real life, Helen, a successful one. Not everyone's path looks the same." The shock on my aunt's face mirrored what I felt inside. The most profound changes were within me. I began to recognize how I'd participated in my own diminishment, how I'd made myself smaller to fit their expectations. In my business, I started charging what I was worth rather than what I thought clients would pay without complaint. I spoke up in family gatherings instead of letting conversations wash over me. Some days were harder than others. Old habits of people-pleasing didn't disappear overnight, but I'd crossed an invisible line at that Christmas dinner and there was no going back. When the Christmas dinner invitation came, I accepted with clear eyes. This time when I arrived, there was a place card with my name at the main table, written in my sister-in-law's perfect calligraphy. Mom caught me looking at it and touched my arm gently. "We saved you a seat," she said. "We always will from now on." It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. And as I took my place at the table, I realized that the most important recognition had come from within. I had finally seen myself, my worth, my voice, my right to take up space. During dinner, Uncle Rob asked about my business. In the past, such questions were cursory, followed quickly by a pivot to someone else's more important achievements. This time, when I mentioned landing a contract with a national retail chain for their rebranding, my father actually put down his fork and asked follow-up questions. "That's a big deal," he said, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "How did you manage to get their attention?" The question caught me off guard. I'd prepared my usual abbreviated answers, the ones that wouldn't bore them or take up too much family time. Instead, I found myself explaining my marketing strategy, the portfolio I'd put together, the presentation that had won them over. My mother leaned forward, actually listening. "You did all that yourself, without a team?" I nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and lingering sadness that this was somehow surprising to her. "That's impressive, Alice," she said, the words sounding impractical but sincere. Across the table, I caught Logan studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, as I helped clear the table, he cornered me in the kitchen. "So you're really making it work, huh? The whole freelance thing." There was no condescension in his voice, just genuine curiosity tinged with something else. It took me a moment to recognize it, uncertainty. "It's not easy," I admitted, stacking plates by the sink. "But yes, I'm making it work, more than working actually, I'm thriving." He nodded slowly. "You know, sometimes I think about what it would be like, not having to report to anyone, building something that's just yours." The confession surprised me. Logan had always seemed so certain of his path, so content with the prestige and security of his engineering career. "You could always try it," I said. "It's never too late to change direction." He gave a short laugh, glancing over his shoulder to where our parents were entertaining guests in the living room. "Yeah, can you imagine the golden boy walking away from his real job? Dad would have a coronary." The comment hung between us, revealing more than perhaps he'd intended. I wondered, not for the first time, if the family's expectations had been a burden for my brothers too, just in different ways. Later that night, as guests began to leave, my mother pulled me aside. There was something tentative in her manner, a quality I rarely associated with her. "I've been thinking about what you said last year," she began, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her blouse. "About how we introduced you versus your brothers." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I was at my garden club meeting last week and Helen asked about all of you, and I realized I was doing it again, talking about the boys' titles first." She looked up at me. So I caught myself. I told them, "My daughter Alice just landed a contract with Brighton Retail, you know, that big chain. She's the creative director for their entire rebranding." My throat tightened, such a small thing, and yet it wasn't small at all. "Thank you," I said simply. She reached out hesitantly and squeezed my hand. "I'm trying, Alice. I don't always get it right, but I'm trying." Then David's wife, Claire, called me one afternoon. "I need your professional opinion," she said without preamble. "We're redoing the nursery for when Emma moves to a big girl bed, and honestly, I'm lost with all the design options." I nearly dropped my phone. In all the years I'd known Claire, she'd never once acknowledged my professional expertise. Her home was a showcase of expensive designer pieces, carefully selected to impress and intimidate. "You want my help with Emma's room?" I repeated, certain I'd misunderstood. If you have time, she said, a new note of respect in her voice. David mentioned that collection of children's book illustrations you did for that hospital wing. They were beautiful, Alice. I had no idea you could do work like that. The project became a bridge between us. Weekends at their house, sketching concepts while Emma toddled around us. Coffee with Claire that turned into actual conversations rather than polite small talk. Learning that beneath her perfect exterior was someone with her own insecurities, her own struggles to fit the mold my family valued so highly. I was terrified of your parents when David and I started dating, she confessed one afternoon as we painted clouds on Emma's ceiling. Your mother kept mentioning David's ex, the one who became a pediatric surgeon. I felt like I was being measured against some impossible standard. I looked at her in surprise. Claire, intimidated, she'd always seemed so effortlessly aligned with my family's values, the right career before children, the perfect wedding, the picture-perfect home. We all were, I said after a moment, measured against impossible standards. I mean, she nodded, adding another swirl of white to a cloud. It's different for Emma. David and I talked about it after last Christmas, about the patterns we don't want to repeat. The nursery became a testament to what was possible with new understanding. A room filled with color and imagination instead of gender-traditional pinks, with space for creativity rather than just prettiness. When it was finished, David stood in the doorway with Emma in his arms, his expression soft with something more than just appreciation for the aesthetics. This is what I want for her, he said quietly. To grow up knowing her value isn't in fitting someone else's idea of who she should be. I thought about the long road that had led us here, how one moment of refusing to accept the status quo had created ripples that continued to expand. Summer brought an unexpected crisis. Dad had a minor heart attack during a golf game, minor being the doctor's assessment, not how it felt to any of us. The family converged on the hospital, old patterns threatening to reemerge under stress. Mom was barely holding it together, oscillating between barking orders and moments of terrified silence. Logan immediately took charge, speaking with doctors, making decisions about care. I found myself slipping back into my familiar role, the quiet support person, there to get coffee and make calls but not to take up space or assert opinions. But as the hours stretched on in the cardiac waiting room, I caught myself falling into that pattern and made a conscious choice to step forward. When the cardiologist came to discuss treatment options, I asked direct, informed questions alongside Logan. When decisions needed to be made about recovery care, I offered concrete suggestions. Mom looked at me with something like surprise when I firmly redirected a conversation about Dad's aftercare that was happening around her rather than with her. This affects you most directly, I told her. What do you think would work best? Later, as we sat together in the hospital cafeteria, she said quietly, when did you become so capable? The question could have stung, but I understood it wasn't meant as an insult. I've always been capable, Mom, I just stopped hiding it. She considered this, turning her coffee cup in slow circles. I was so scared today, still am, but watching you and Logan work together to handle everything, it helped. That's what family does, I said. Real family, we show up as our full selves and support each other without keeping score or assigning roles. Dad's recovery became another opportunity for reshaping our family's dynamics. I took 2 weeks off work to help at my parents' house, not out of obligation but choice. My mother and I found a new rhythm, sharing responsibilities without the old hierarchy that had placed her control against my compliance. One evening, as Dad napped in his recliner and Mom took a rare moment for herself in a bath, I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight. Logan joined me, 2 glasses of iced tea in hand. Remember when we used to catch those in jars? He asked, handing me a glass. And Mom would make us let them go because keeping them was cruel, I added, smiling at the memory. We swung in comfortable silence for a while, the creaking of the chains a familiar soundtrack from childhood. I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas, he finally said, about changing direction. I glanced at him, waiting. I'm starting a consulting business on the side, using my engineering background but on my terms. He looked almost embarrassed. I've been planning it for months but didn't know how to tell everyone. Why not? He shrugged, but it wasn't casual. Afraid of disappointment, I guess, of not meeting expectations. I understood then that my brothers had carried their own versions of the burden I'd felt. Different manifestations, but the same root: the fear of being seen as less than what our family expected, the fear of losing approval. For what it's worth, I said, I think it's great, and I'm pretty good at branding if you need help with that. His smile was genuine, relieved. I was hoping you'd say that. By the time the leaves began to change again, my relationship with my family had evolved into something I wouldn't have recognized a year earlier. Not perfect, there were still moments of frustration, of falling back into old patterns, but fundamentally changed. Dad's health scare had softened some of his harder edges. During a family dinner, he actually asked my advice about modernizing the family insurance business's online presence. Your mother showed me that Brighton retail website you designed, he said gruffly. It's got, what do you call it, user experience. That's what our site needs. Coming from him, it was more than acknowledgement of my skills. It was an admission that I had expertise he valued, that I could contribute in ways he respected. The project became an unexpected space for connection. Working together, I saw him not just as my father but as a man who'd built something from nothing, who took pride in his work just as I did in mine. He saw me not just as his daughter but as a professional with insights he hadn't considered. You know, he said one afternoon as we reviewed the prototype I'd created, you remind me of my father sometimes. He had that same creative streak, could look at problems sideways and see solutions nobody else did. It was perhaps the highest compliment he could give, comparing me to the grandfather I'd adored, the man whose entrepreneurial spirit had built our family's foundation. I thought about the upcoming holiday, the invitation on my counter for Christmas dinner at my parents' house. There would still be challenging moments, old hurts that might resurface, patterns not fully broken. But we were all trying now, seeing each other more clearly, making space for authenticity rather than performance. My phone chimed with a text from my mother, just confirming you're coming tomorrow, your place card is ready. Such a simple message, but it carried the weight of recognition. Of being seen. I typed back, I'll be there. And once you see yourself clearly, it becomes easier for others to see you too.